Hello, and welcome to Dig a Podcast, a show that tells the in-depth story behind the songs of the greatest band that is, was, and ever will be, the Beatles. In this season, Season 1, we will explore the Beatles' first LP, Introducing the Beatles, or our UK listeners would know it as Please Please Me. Introducing the Beatles was originally scheduled for a July 1963 release, but came out on the 10th of January 1964 on VJ Records, whereas Please Please Me was released on the 23rd of March 1963 on EMI's Parlophone label. Let's continue our journey with
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Anna, Go to Him. In the Beatles anthology television show and videos, McCartney explains that the Beatles thought of themselves as an R&B combo. This fact isn't more noticeable than in this first cover song ever to be heard on American shores. The influence of rhythm and blues artists such as Arthur Alexander was immense on the Beatles, especially John Lennon, whose lead vocal contributions on this song show that he was well rehearsed in captivating the intensity and warmth of the original recording. In an interview in 1987, McCartney actually goes as far as saying that in the early days the Beatles wanted to be like Arthur Alexander. On a historical level, we also focus on a little known fact that this song, in its single form, currently appears to be the rarest of all US Beatle records, reportedly fetching up to $15,000 per copy. Songwriting history. Arthur Alexander, who hailed from Florence, Alabama, became one of the biggest recording artists in the country soul genre. His claim to fame on the Billboard Hot 100 was the hit You Better Move On, which peaked at number 24 in April of 1962, and was also covered by the Rolling Stones. During the Beatles' search for songs to perform in their stage act, they were keen to learn songs that no one else were doing. Hence, many flip sides of the songs they admired became part of their live performances at the Cavern Club in Hamburg and elsewhere. The flip side to You Better Move On was a shot of rhythm and blues, which the Beatles performed live on stage as well as on BBC Radio. This is available on their album Live at the BBC. His next single, Where Have You Been All My Life, failed to make the top 40, but the flip side, Soldier of Love, was also performed by the Beatles live as well as on the BBC, also available on Live at the BBC. Arthur Alexander's next single, the self-penned Anna Go to Him, named after Arthur's real-life wife, Anne, became a top 10 hit on the Billboard R&B charts, number 68 on the pop chart, and made a big enough impact on the Beatles, especially John Lennon, to suggest the song to be recorded on their first album, Please Please Me. Alexander's R&B chart career continued off and on for many years, but without being able to crack the Billboard Top 40 again. His closest attempt was in 1975 with a remake of an earlier self-penned song, Every Day I Have to Cry Some, released on Buddha Records, which he never received any money for, even though it peaked at number 45. Shortly after this, despite his repeated chart success over the years, Arthur Alexander dropped into obscurity. He had been struggling financially throughout his career and felt it was time to retire from the music business, and became a bus driver in Cleveland, Ohio, for a local social service organization. After being tracked down by former musician friends he had recorded with in Muscle Shoals, Alabama in the 60s, he was encouraged to make a comeback. He recorded the album Lonely Just Like Me in 1993, but suffered a heart attack in June of that year, 3 days after his performance in Nashville, Tennessee. His legacy, although not widely known, is accented by cover versions of his material throughout the years. In 1963, the Steve Alamos version of the South Penn song Every Day I Have to Cry kept his career going through songwriting royalty payments. And being a singer-songwriter whose material has been covered by such notable artists as the Rolling Stones, The Who, Esther Phillips, Joe Tex, Marshall Crenshaw, Bob Dylan, Pearl Jam, Ry Cooder, and of course the Beatles, definitely adds great credibility to his career. Even though his later career went largely unnoticed by most, respect by those who were acquainted with his work were abundant, as evidenced by John Lennon having several Alexander singles in his jukebox in the Dakota in New York City, as well as George Harrison's jukebox at the Crackerpox Palace home. Recording history. This song was also one of the 10 songs recorded on that historic day on February 11th, 1963, the date chosen to produce the first Beatles album, Please Please Me. The third of 3 sessions of that day, the evening session, was held between 7:30 and 10:45 p.m. at EMI Studio 2. Keep in mind that they had been recording since 10 that morning, with only 2 1.5-hour breaks in between. But those weren't even breaks for the Beatles, since they asked to keep practicing while George Martin and his staff took their breaks. Since just over 2 hours remained on the day's session, the Beatles still had half an album to record. So they got to work right away, but unfortunately they got off to an unproductive start. They tried frustratingly to record a McCartney-Lennon song entitled Hold Me Tight, going through 13 takes of the song, which took up a lot of time. After many false starts, breakdowns, and edit pieces, only 2 complete versions were performed. It was estimated that a good 30 minutes, probably more, was wasted with this song that never even made it to the album. It was redone for the next British album with the Beatles. With that out of the way and the pressure on, they started to work on 5 cover songs that they would perform on stage. The first one recorded was Anna Go to Him, which was probably started around 8:15 p.m. Since they already had the arrangement down, they went through 3 complete takes of the song, and the third one was deemed the best. This was a completely live performance with no overdubs or edits needed. Both the mono and stereo mixes of the song, as well as the rest of the first album, were created on February the 25th, 1965 in the control room of EMI Studio 1 by George Martin and engineers Norman Smith and A.B. Lincoln. Thanks for listening to Dig a Podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform. This has been a Team Wilco production. Until next time, if you know what I mean. Do I did? No? Okay.